Welcome, everyone. I can see some people have already started to join. So welcome here. We are really going to start probably in 3-4 minutes, because there's always a little bit of a latency between the time everybody gets in and the time it's supposed to start. Okay, yeah, I see the number of people joining still increasing. So just an extra minute, and then we're going to be starting. So there's a question about a mobile device. I think yes, Eric should be able to answer you on this one. There's a couple of options. I think there's an app, but there's also a way to connect through phone. Welcome, everybody. So I still see the number growing. Good. Oh, I recognize some name I know. Great. Thank you, Mark. So I will try to, just to keep the camera on for the session. If there's some challenge in terms of bandwidth, this can happen these days. So we'll, I might turn it off at some point. Welcome to all of you to this webinar. The idea for us is really to share some of the current state of practice in terms of managing, the transition between what the world used to be a few weeks ago and where we're heading to in the coming months. What we've really been focusing on is really to try not to come with any preconceived idea, coming up with content that would be derived from a past event, but really go back to the source and ask quite a number of people what is really happening these days and how they are tackling the issue. So it's really some fresh content. I'm Hervé. I work for EIPM. EIPM is going to celebrate 30 years at the end of this year. We train people all over the world in the field of purchasing. I'm not going to spend more time on that introduction. So I'm just going to start, and I think there's a lot of discussion these days on how the economic recovery is going to look like. But first and foremost, what's going to be decisive in terms of the evolution of the situation will be about the evolution of the pandemic. There are a number of people who have been putting forward a number of scenarios. I kind of like these four scenarios. And this is coming from an epidemiologist and a mathematician who've been writing an article already some time ago, end of March. And there's no way, when it's a new virus, to know exactly how this is going to unfold. So basically, there could be situations where it could disappear quite rapidly, where it could disappear slowly, where it could still be active in some country and disappears of other countries. And there's also the possibility of having multiple waves coming one after the other. And basically today we still have no idea, no clues about which one is going to be the most likely scenario. And well, we need to be ready. Whatever happens, we need to be ready to restart if a lot of things are going to restart. And I think that's some of the main challenge. Anytime you can just drop a message, a comment, a reaction, a question in the chat. I'll be glad to pick some of the point as we go through. Maybe not immediately, but from time to time I might be stopping and looking at some of the comments. So what we've been doing is on the 8th of April and the 5th of May, we've been running some virtual CPO roundtables. We've brought together 38 CPOs, many of them from organizations that have been winning the EIPM Peter Krajic Award and a few more. And basically we gave them this framework. Okay, we described the evolution of the situation in 3 stages. The first one, which is about restoring continuity, making sure at the beginning of the confinement, at least here in Europe, everybody was able to go and work from home. Then recovering performance, ensuring a continuity of the business, but also ensuring there would be supply chain that would be working, suppliers that would be operating, so company could continue to work. And then the next one, which is about regaining advantage. So how to take advantage of the current situation in order to end up, in a stronger position. This is, of course, not easy in every industry. There will be some differences. Some industries have been, in some ways, very favored by the current crisis, like anything related for packaging for food, for instance, has been going very strong, for example. But very diverse situation across industries. But the idea was to get all of them to answer 3 questions. What were the key immediate actions to support restoring continuity? What were their next critical actions for recovering and potentially regaining advantage? And the third question we asked them was, what would be their role in the forthcoming planning process, budgeting process, in order to move forward with the organization? It's been really good session we had with them. They were very keen to exchange. I think a lot of people were a little bit in the dark in terms of what was happening in other companies. So we had some really fruitful discussion. Really what we ended up in terms of realization was, well, the old world is dying. There is something that we are not going to go back to, at least rapidly, and we don't know yet how the future is going to look like. So we're in a situation that's best described by academics as an era of ferment. An era of ferment is a period of discontinuity where we're still unsure of what's going to happen. Some of the practice from the past are still alive, and some of the practice for the future have not yet been fully implemented. So you've got all these attempts to bring new ways of working, to adapt to the new situation, while keeping some elements from yesterday that are taking place. We'll be able to discuss briefly during that session what can we learn about past investment. I think it's really important to pay attention to this. Not companies will have the same outcomes in terms of their experience of the current situation. And very clearly, the ones who've been investing in the past in good practices, in implementing, systematic approach that were leading to excellence from a purchasing and supply management point of view, they are really leveraging some of these investments. They are stronger, it's easier, they can focus on the right thing, and they're navigating through these times with a certain advantage, I would say. We also will spend some time to describe the current transition and some of the tensions that we see during that transition. And finally, we'll say a few words about what might be happening into the future. But I think it's going to be quite light, and I'm not going to take a crystal ball and tell you extreme things in terms of this will happen and that will happen. So what about the past? What have we learned during this period about our past investments? So I was really mentioning this was quite interesting to hear across all these companies, how much when they've invested in developing good relationship with their supplier in the past, this has been really something very positive. In the food industry, in other sectors like semiconductors, we had some of the purchasing, the CPO that were taking part in our session, telling us clearly that they could see suppliers were treating them as a preferred client, and they were really helping them to manage things. And one of them even said we could really focus on tier 3, tier 4 issues because on the tier 1 level, things were well managed, well handled, and they wanted to reassure us that everything was under control. So very interesting element here. Others had been working on a regular basis in terms of resizing their safety stock, taking into account some of the uncertainty out there, and that was also helping to address some of the challenge. Some of them had invested in data scientists, people who could program in Python, and very quickly they were able to develop internally some very simple tools that were helping them every morning to spot, some of the areas where there was potentially issues and where they should be paying attention and supporting daily priorities. Business continuity plans, companies that are really done all the necessary steps in terms of getting ready, realize how much this was beneficial and how much this was helping them to be fast. And some of the companies on the purchasing side who had invested in risk management, they were quickly escalated to a fairly high level in the organization. And some of them were telling us that they had been appointed by the company and to have a weekly meeting at board level in order to update on the situation, leveraging the risks tool they had been implementing. I think that's important news, and that's good news. We're living through turbulences, but we can see that sound practices that are expected to deliver benefits over time deliver value in good periods, but they also deliver extremely good value during this period of challenges and difficulties. So I think that's one of the first lessons I would like to insist on. We shouldn't be stopping this investment in all this good practice simply because things are changing. They're showing that they're paying off. So now I'd like to take you through the element of transition. The way I've described the transition is really by collecting all the input from the participants. And what I saw was, over time, they've been managing some contradictory forces. So some kind of paradox, some kind of tensions, and they've done that in a fairly rapid and fairly efficient way that I'm going to share with you. So the first paradox somehow was the one of handling the internal challenges while acting as a good citizen. So it was very interesting to see how many of the people who joined our CPO sessions were saying, on one hand, we were really doing whatever it was taking in order to, get the business operating, get everybody working from home. And on the other side, saying, hey, we've put a special task force in place in order to act as a good citizen and support hospitals and other sourcing activities for government and things like this. So crisis management team, fast decision process, looking at simplification of the policies in terms of running some of the procurement activities. Some companies said in 48 hours they were having everybody working from home. Some of them got workstations delivered in the home of some of their suppliers' employees so they could continue to work very rapidly. E-signatures that have been scaled up really rapidly in many companies. And in some cases, really going fast in terms of helping some suppliers who were in difficult situations. So that was a little bit in between, helping yourself and helping the broader world. But I think that was important. We even had a company with 200,000 people all around the world, where it took them a little bit more time because they had to get some people back home. And they have a major challenge in terms of cybersecurity to address. But they were able to get everybody, back safe conditions, working from home within a few weeks. So very interesting approach that have been working pretty well here. In terms of acting as a good citizen, we've seen some companies producing hand sanitizer, giving that to hospitals, but also to some of their suppliers, offering some equipments, materials to hospitals, helping government to source protective equipment from China, for instance. So that was somehow the first tension. On one hand, taking care of oneself, and on the other hand, also contributing to some broader societal support. The second tension was about very quickly reorganizing the team, and very often reorganization can be a source of tension. And here, at the same time, making sure that they will be focusing on the well-being of people. So on the well-being of people, I think the organization that have done things that were particularly noticeable during this period was the attention to individual. One of the CPO told us that he's been having personal discussion with 30% of the people, and it wasn't just work-related, but also asking about people's life and how they were, their feelings and things like that, emotions. And that was something coming up in many of the points. It was important to take the time to listen, to talk, to be there for the people. Also, some companies have produced rapidly some guidelines on how to reduce stress, how to handle on a personal basis the situation, and creating from time to time at team level some opportunities for socializing. So even though people were remotely located, really investing in, the personal individuals, making sure they were fine, but also making sure a team was still alive and going forward. At the same time, they needed to take quick actions and change a number of things in terms of the organization. We were managing different pace and outlook. Some of the people were focusing on, day-to-day evolution of the supply situation, where other people were looking at longer-term type of development. What would be the longer-term risk, how they could get prepared for that. Some of them were looking into short-term contracts, saying where is it possible to realign some of the priorities in terms of spend. For instance, in the media categories, spending monies for cars advertising on TV wasn't probably the best investment at that time, while still being on some of the social media was making a lot of sense. And some of the participants told us that they rapidly ask a number of people to revisit all the categories to get access to a few information to try to understand the situation in order to be ready for the future development. So really this kind of dual perspective. On one hand, taking care of people, having one-to-one exchange, making sure the emotions and the issues could be expressed in a free way, providing guidance to people on how to manage the situation, while very quickly, reframing the team so it was possible to move forward. Okay, next. So the third tension that we saw was the one about looking close and far at what was happening in the supply chain, and that was quite striking in terms of elements. So on one hand, we had a lot of people who said how much they've been very systematic and structured in terms of leveraging their supplier relationship approach, having regular contact with their tier one supplier. And at the same time, others were looking also, much further down into their supply chain. And in fact, they were doing both at the same time for most of them. So leveraging existing collaboration with supplier. Some of them, insisted on this great support they had from their tier one. They said, we've put our SRM into a tactical mode, so having more regular meetings, a bit more operational. There was one company where they were saying they'd been running 2 meetings per day with critical supplier, with the support of the CEO or occasionally other people from the board, and they had done 36 of these exchange. A lot of companies have been investing in a relationship with logistics partners in order to secure transportation, because for some, especially being located in Asia at some point, this was one of the big challenge in terms of paying attention to this. Sometimes, paying a bit more in terms of being able to secure some possibilities for transportation, but really working hard in building this collaboration. And then there was the other side, which was to really look much deeper. Some of the companies implemented rapidly some form of a survey to all their employees located all around the world, to ask them if they were seeing any issues coming up and what type of issues could be coming up, and things like this. And they looked at past disruption. So they looked at who was in a fragile situation before, and they immediately paid attention to sometime tier 2, tier 3 supplier in part of the business that was in this difficult situation. A few companies told us how much they've been lobbying government in places in Southeast Asia, so some of their supplier could continue to work. One company told us how they've been installing some old equipments for like a short-term hotel for a tier 4 supplier, so they could continue to operate in the Philippines, for instance. What else? Some look really, deep and ask about a lot of the evolution to all of their contact outside the company. One of the things that was hard to predict and hard to foresee was labor shortages. In some areas, especially in Asia, some people had left the region, and it was difficult to get good information about how companies would be able to restart with the right level in terms of labor force. And help was provided to some supplier of different nature. Some of them was about cash flow. Some of them was really helping them with more specific aspect. But I think that was really interesting to have this dual perspective. Managing relationship with a few close supplier, but also supporting some of the tier 3, tier 4 in order to be able to continue operating. This is taking us to the fourth, I would say, the fourth kind of tension that took place, which was very quickly to start to look at both risk and opportunities. So not just to be, focusing on what can go wrong, but also looking at the crisis as an opportunity to make progress on a number of aspects. And I think that was a very interesting mindset, from a lot of the people that were together in the room, virtual room with us, was kind of having this dual perspective in terms of, paying attention, being a little bit paranoid about what can go wrong, but at the same time being optimistic about, this is also full of opportunities that we need to seize. In terms of the risk side, there was a number of points. Some of the people were starting to pay attention and listening to voices from political world, for instance, in terms of a new regulation to come. There was someone who talked about developing a calculation about the total cost of resilience. So what would be the full cost of operating safely and without interruption the supply chain, and take that into account as an extension of the TCO. Some started to make some of their risk management practice to go deeper, more holistic, started to look at some of the existing tool. But this was also a strong point. A lot of people are now rushing to look into the what exists in terms of risk management tool, but the risk management tool at best could give you an indication of pay attention here. The real advantage you might be getting will be from the relationship you will be building. So yes, there will be some investment in digital tools, but the reality is to transform that into an advantage, to transform that into, reacting better than competitors, will only happen if there's this relationship dimension behind. And I think that's quite important. There's no magic in this digital tool anyway. So it's a lot of the human interaction and decision that come after that will be really bringing some of the benefit. Some of them also develop some what-if scenarios, even trying to understand how they could these scenarios would not just be impacting their company, but also some of their supply chain, just to understand if some of the some branches of their supply chain would be at risk if they were to go into specific scenarios. And also there were some adaptation of the budgeting process and planning process in order to get things in place. And this is continuing in most companies by having much faster loop, and I will be coming on this a bit later. So that was more about the risk side, I would say. But at the same time, there was also a lot of the positive. I guess we've heard a lot of people saying that, we will have new policies on working from home, and this will have an impact in terms of real estate. So that's quite a usual kind of word I'm hearing these days. But also, some of the companies were we could see they were trying to take advantage of the disappearance of boundaries between functions. So this was a moment where cross-functional working was the norm, even cross-company working was the norm, and therefore it was much easier to not just get access to the right people, but to be listened to when you have something a bit unexpected, unusual, different to propose. Some of the people who were there in our events, they've started to look at their market. They have a number of suppliers who are bottleneck suppliers who usually are not very easy to maneuver and who don't give them a lot of attention. So they're trying to systematically look at this supplier and to try to understand if, suddenly they might become more attractive to this supplier. And they're thinking of what can they do to approach them in order to, get further attention and create a new relationship with them. So that's an interesting approach here. One of the company, which was in the luxury business, they've been asking every buyer all around the world to come up with one breakthrough change idea and to start to promote these ideas toward the top management. In some cases, these were ideas that were in the pipeline in the past that were not accepted before, simply because there wasn't the appetite on the business side to implement them. There was some fear. But today, because of the fluidity in the organization, because of the willingness to take actions, these ideas could get an extra value in terms of providing some advantage. And they've been, systematically promoting these ones at local and global level. There was some discussion about localizing activities with very different view. I mean, very clearly, some of the people were saying that anyway, a more regional approach was already on its way, and this would just reinforce this aspect. But also some people saying that well, there might be some opportunities to push for dual source now that we see some of the impact on some activities, and to look at different setup. But I don't think there was a very clear view that things would be looking quickly extremely different from that point of view. What I was hearing was more about being a bit more agile, faster to recovery, but not so much some drastic immediate changes on this element. But I don't think you will be surprised. Also, and I think the big point here was some people were saying we're really ready to look at options that would be more local, but this needs to come with added value. So maybe we can pay more, but we need to get something different in terms of sustainability, in terms of services that can also make a difference if we work with more local supplier. And also, I think that's an obvious case in any kind of a contraction of the economy situation. There will be some opportunities to potentially, take a stake in some of the suppliers, or even to do some acquisition. And that's something that, purchasing has the possibility to contribute to by spotting some opportunities. So this was really the different, the different tensions. Handling internal issue while being a good citizen at the beginning of the phase. Then, at the same time, reorganizing the team very rapidly while taking care of the people, looking close and far into the supply chain in order to get back to a good level of performance. And in some occasion, some companies have been really doing very impressive work. In many, I mean, I've not heard so far, and probably because they're too busy with it, but I've not heard a lot of catastrophes in terms of disruption of supply chain these days. I've heard a lot of people who said we were very fearful, we thought it was going to be difficult, but we managed to handle most of the situations. And then looking at both risk and supply opportunities. You will get access to the slide, so I've put like a little simple kind of frameworks on the right that can help you think in terms of what have we done, what should we do differently, maybe going into the future. So I hope this section about managing transition was useful in terms of realizing what was happening. I think if I try to put things into a slightly more academic perspective, what has happened is the following, okay? When we are operating in a normal mode, there is so much we know about the current situation. And then we have a set of reasonable assumptions, and then there's a few things happening we need to deal with. And most of our environment, we understand it, we know how it's going to unfold, and there's a few things we can take care of. And during this period, what we have is a world where we know very little we have very little certainty. We have some reasonable assumptions, but not too many. And there's a lot of things that we ignore and that we need to be ready to face. So it's a little bit like, getting up every 6 months and trying to catch up within the first hour of the morning at what's happening with the business. So what do we need in this type of situation? We need a rapid response. And this is not something where we can take a lot of time to discuss about what could be implemented. We need improved visibility. And it's not just data, but it's also the opinions of the different people located all around the world who are closest to the potential issues that are important in terms of bringing the visibility and collective intelligence. So it's not about the view of the central procurement team or the central organization versus a local, or the view of the supplier versus us. It's really about bringing this collective intelligence together. So basically, the way of operating, and this will continue like this, maybe the loop will get a bit longer over time, but you need to have very, very strong central team who have some of the resources, who can address every communication issues as well to the client, to the suppliers. And what they can do is they can listen to what's coming from the rest of the world. They can review some of the options that are being proposed by everyone, decide on some course of actions, allocate some resources, sometimes being part of the implementation. But they depend on everyone else who's located across the world, who's close to the challenges, who are scanning for short and midterm issues, who are assessing the potential impact of what's happening out there, who can suggest some potential response and sometimes, already assess and anticipate, take actions to manage that. And they can also, take the input from the global perspective to support with what has been operating. So fast loop. So instead of having reviews that take place over once a month, once every quarter, then it becomes much faster in terms of operation. During the first weeks, it was on a daily basis that you had these loops going around. So for instance, in the future, if you look at the budget, you will have this much shorter loop in terms of budget planning that will be, very quickly gathering some input, putting together some form of assumptions that will need to be validated in a cross-functional work, so you can quickly adapt and make sure that you can move forward with this. Any questions, any reactions? You're very quiet this morning. Don't hesitate to place any kind of reaction question in the chat. Where are we? Okay. So a few words about the world to come. It's, of course, as I said before, it's very, very difficult. I think it was with quite some pleasure that I went back to one of the pictures I had put together 2 years ago, and basically this was the time we were looking at complexity, and what we said at that time during the EIPM conference is well, if there's a lot of uncertainty and if there's a lot of complexity in terms of relationship, this is when we deserve the attention from the board of the company. So this is challenging, this is demanding situation, but this is the period where we can show our worth, where we can contribute to really steer the organization in the right direction. So it's really in this period of uncertainty, if we can be a troublemaker, then we get the attention at the highest level, and we need to see that as an opportunity to demonstrate what we can do and to push things forward. When we ask participants in terms of what was about the future, I think there were 3 strong messages. A continuous attention to be paid to the demand, rethinking the demand, and resizing the demand, so we can make sure that we can adapt both the volumes but also what we buy to the difficult economic or to the positive economic development we will see forward. Also, a strong view about the need to have a sort of evolution of the risk management, probably with a governance that's different, more strong in terms of the ability to allocate resources, take actions with the right people driving the right actions, and some ways of better looking at all the potential challenges, risk, taking decisions, doing analysis that are sometimes a bit less like, who thinks it's a big issue or not, a bit more informed by facts. And again, this kind of a quicker loops in terms of reaction. And of course, there will be a strong focus in terms of cost for many companies. But there was a very strong view that first, well, this is something we've seen before. So we need to look back at what we've done and what has worked well, and that we should not be aiming for, short-term, simple actions, but think a little bit more long-term and find opportunities to suggest some breakthroughs. This is the only thing that's going to pay, because volumes are going to go so much down in some industries that we shouldn't be expecting to have a better price. So it will only be by going through stronger breakthrough in terms of changes together with people inside the company that it will be possible. This led me to build, if you want, this kind of picture. We've already started to see people that don't try to think at all. They apply the very quick response loop. They just, tell suppliers, we stopped the contract, we are going to renegotiate, and you should be ready to give us a better price. So yeah, okay, that's fine. You don't think, you don't revisit your assumption, you just go ahead, you put pressure, and then you expect to, get something out of it. Welcome to a world that's going to create even more risk for yourself, that's going to create some backlash, and where you're not sure to get something positive out of. There's the smart response loop, which is very often to revisit some of the assumptions in terms of volumes, geographic development, trying to find ways of, assessing the needs in different ways, and to adapt rapidly your expectations from supplier from that perspective. So that's a logical way forward. But then I think revisiting a lot more assumptions, not the one about volumes, but the nature of demand, the importance of coming up in multiple areas, being very demanding in terms of give me opportunities to see disruptions. What can be done to radically simplify? What can be done to come up with more disruptive innovation that could be actually helping us to go through this situation and bring some good things forward. So I think that's my point. You need to play the good fight. All of these take time. So you need to be more on the right for me, and you need to make sure that you're going to be able to implement the right response loop by revisiting as much as possible all the assumptions, because today you have a lot of your stakeholders that are willing to look at the world in a different way. They stop looking at their immediate, I would say, functional concerns. They're also looking at what's the best for the whole company. So we need to take advantage of this. A few words in terms of a digital project. I think the world will look very different for two types of companies. So basically, there's a sort of inflection point when you invest in digital. So if you don't yet have clean data, if you don't yet have data lakes across different departments that allow you to connect different data sets together, this is going to be a challenge, because these are needed investments that are quite expensive. but making sure that all the sources of information go into one single place and that everything is of quality. I'm not sure there will be some investment, but let's see. Now, if you've already passed that level and you've done some work in terms of implementing some of the capabilities to have these broader views by assembling data from different perspectives, there will be some project that will be going forward and that can really help. And I think it's very important to focus during this period on project where you can have a real strategic impact, not just a functional impact. So it can be tempting to invest in controlling the behavior of your stakeholders. But I think it's more important to invest in whatever's going to help with the strategic development of the function, whether in terms of demand management that could be powered by machine learning and taking out some of the human fear and concerns out of this, but quickly readapt the loop. Investing in some risk management tool and digital support for that. But also, it's a good time to invest in some predictive costing tool. And there will be a lot of variation probably in terms of a price for many things. So it's possible today to get access to price comparisons, but also to use machine learning to do some of the costing, for instance, on electronic cards. So all these points are not about automating the low value added task that buyers do on a day-to-day basis. I hope you've made already progress on that, but they're more about augmenting the capability of your category manager, giving them a strategic augmentation so they can, they can have a better negotiation, they can have a better attention to risk issues where they are really going to pop up. So I think that would be, the two things. It will be difficult to invest in some of the basics, but if you can do it quick, because that's important in order to get access to all of the data in one place. But at the same time, look at the few projects where you could be investing in terms of augmenting the capability of your more strategic buyers. Well, that's it. That's for my presentation. Lot of things to say. Wow. Short amount of time, but a lot of things have been happening over the past 2 months. Any questions, any reactions? Any comments, any surprise? Any of you who had totally different experience? Any of you will recognize some of the tensions, will recognize some of the discussion? What a beautiful silence. I hope you were able to hear me. Huh? I got to thank you. Well, thanks a lot to you. From Anita. Don't hesitate. Well, in that case, I think it will be soon time to say goodbye. I got one more reaction. Thank you as well. So not much of a strong reaction coming from Marina. Hello, Marina. So don't hesitate. You can also write back to me if you have some points you want to discuss. I think I'm always interested to see. Aki, do you have a question? I'm always interested to hear about your experience. I really want to go into this with open eye, listening to what people are telling me. I'm conscious that I've probably been talking so far to companies where things they were pretty well prepared and they were good at reacting, and situation were probably not the most dramatic. So very interested to hear other stories. Um, any reflection on global political instability and how to prepare for potential trade wars? Very simple. What is the implication of a trade war? Is tariff barrier. Okay, so always have a scenario of what would happen if suddenly, the trade tariff would be going up by so much. So this would cover you for a situation where it would be a trade war, and this would cover you for a situation where you could have something like a change in terms of currencies. I think what's very important to have as information for most of your categories is to look at what would be the time needed to open a second source in a specific country or in any country. And that's probably the best question to ask, to look probably first where you've got bottlenecks and ask the question, if from that country there were some blockages, either political or currency, how much time it would take us to do something and to regain a positive situation. I think that would be my sound advice, to prioritize and to look at it that way. And yes, good relationships are absolutely essential. Absolutely essential. It's this is we're going to be talking a lot about data and analytics and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, the decision of favoring a client over another, the decision of paying attention to this client or that one, is decisive in this moment. So the quality of this relationship, the ability to listen, the ability not to pressure, but to be there and to have a positive way to look at the relationship, of sharing the bad news very fast. We had some people who've set up full information on the day-to-day information on Microsoft Teams pages for their supplier, and they say, we share all the information we have with you. So yeah, that's a big point. And I think we need to be ready to tell inside the company that not everything is flexible, and it doesn't make sense to take quick decisions. I heard of people who started to manage also internally relationship because they had some of their IT team saying, we need to move back everything to Europe, and well, we need to be cautious about immediate reactions. Start from the perspective of where there are priorities. And where there are priorities is really about looking at critical items, where there are bottlenecks, where there are single source. There will be some attention given to IP issues. There will be attention given to standard interface that allow you to, create alternatives quickly. But I think, case by case, you need to look at where there is the biggest challenge forward in terms of bottleneck. Thanks a lot. Again, drop me a mail, a message, share with me your experience. Have any questions you want. Always happy to hear about what's happening. I've been in my house for about the past 40 days, and it's difficult to really stay close and to feel and understand what's really happening. And I think it's important to go in this with, open eyes, open ear, and really be ready. I think I gave a speech in December. It was, whatever happened, we should be ready. So I think now it's really time. Whatever happened, we should be ready. We should be ready to react, to think positively, to go forward, to take care of ourselves, but also to take care of our supply chain, our suppliers, in the best possible way with what we have in terms of means, whether attention, resource, and good spirit. All the best to you, and hope to be in contact with you very soon. Bye-bye.